Sometimes the moments that change us are the ones we never see coming, the ones that drop us into a life we did not plan and ask us to somehow find our footing again. Sharon Spano has lived through more than one of these moments, from being separated from her mother as a child to raising her son Michael through a rare and unpredictable condition. Her story is a reminder of how love can stretch us, break us open, and also remake us in ways we never expected. What I felt talking with Sharon was this quiet strength that she carries, the kind that comes from years of doing the hard inner work, the kind that grows when life keeps asking more from you than you think you have to give. Today, she shares how those early ruptures shaped the way she shows up in the world, how she learned to honor her own humanity, and how the years with Michael transformed her sense of purpose. It is tender and honest and full of the kind of truth that stays with you.
I've learned that if we don't know where we belong in that early family system, meaning mom and dad, that's our original family system, I really believe we don't know where we belong anywhere. So similar to your story, it took me many years to figure out that this had a tremendous impact on me.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea: that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am here with Sharon. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Matt. Thanks so much for having me on board today.
Well, thank you for wanting to come on this journey, or I call it a journey, of the Life Shift Podcast. And it has been for the last, I guess I started in 2022, so 230 something episodes. It's been this healing journey that I never knew that I needed, and getting to talk to so many people from around the world. You happen to be in a very simple or close city to me, but being able to talk to so many people about these moments in our lives, these line in the sand moments that for many of us create this before and after, and seeing how we as humans kind of move through the world after those has been just something I never could have expected for myself. So I appreciate you coming on this journey.
Well, I appreciate you're doing the work you're doing on this show because I think it's very important work.
I did not know that when I started it, but I did know that I needed something like this when I was 8. My life shift really, I guess my biggest life shift, I know we have many of them, but when I was 8, I lived full time with my mom in Massachusetts, and my father lived in Georgia. My parents were separated for a few years at that point. And I went to visit my father for a long summer vacation. And one day after summer camp, he had to pull me into his office and he had to tell me that my mom had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And at that singular moment, as that last word left his mouth and I kind of understood what he said, I knew that everything that we had imagined for my life was no longer possible, because my primary parent was now gone. The person that I felt safe with, not that I didn't feel safe with my father, but I didn't see him very often. And I wasn't going to go to the same school, and I wasn't going to have a home that I called my own anymore. It was going to have to be recreated. And this was 1989. So people weren't talking. They weren't, especially to kids. I felt like I looked around and all the adults didn't know what they were doing, but I definitely knew that they needed to see that I was okay. So I just stuffed it down like a good 8-year-old would do, and showed everyone that I was perfect. And I needed to be perfect because I was afraid that if I wasn't, everyone else was going to leave. Because for me, it felt like, my mom abandoned me. Now I have to make sure that I'm okay. Now I know she didn't, but that's just what an 8-year-old brain kind of thinks, or mind did. And all along, as I was struggling through healing this grief that I had it took me about 20 years, I was just like, do other people have these line in the sand moments in which their world is completely flipped upside down or turned into something brand new? And so that's really where the show came from. And now it just feels so important, because I know how alone I felt in that moment. And I'm sure you felt alone in your life shift moments, or some of those. And to be able to hear a 40-something-year-old version of myself talk about how I felt and how I was okay and I was, doing all these things, I think it would have helped that 8-year-old version of me. So I always think of him as I have these conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, these are pivotal moments, and particularly at 8, I can't even imagine. I mean, that's just an extraordinary journey that you've been on. And I think it's so important that you're sharing that with people because, as you say, we do feel so isolated and alone in those moments. And I think it gives people hope and encouragement to know that they can get through them and be better on the other side and actually serve humanity in a more important way as a result of that learning and that experience.
Yeah, I'm proud to present the way that I do now, fully like, here are my flaws, here's how I'm feeling today. Like, those, none of those things were allowed for me growing up, or they didn't feel allowed. They felt very unsafe. And now I can show up fully and just say, look, today's not a good day, and that's okay. And I will find my way through whatever I'm going through. And I think it's really important, especially as a guy, to just model that, like, we're human. Like, things are going to go wrong. We're going to feel certain ways. We're going to be sad. We're going to cry. Like, all those things are okay. And I feel like growing up, I was like, oh, those were not good.
Did you wind up, could I ask, did you wind up living with your father?
Yeah.
Um,
And my father he did the best he knew how to do. And I know that full-heartedly, but he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't ready to be a full-time solo parent. Like, he was living the dream in a way, because he could be the bachelor in a different
mhm.
state and see his kid when he wanted to. Like, of course he wanted to, but yeah, we created a bond that we wouldn't have had otherwise because of this. And I'm very grateful for that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I did move in, everything changed, but here I am, and
Yeah.
life is good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how we come out on the other side. You got to do the work though. And I'm sure you did eventually. At
It
8,
took
we
me
can't,
20 something years.
yeah, at 8, we don't know what to do. And back then, as you said, parents often didn't know that you probably should seek some outside help for that child or whatever. But I think we're getting better at all of that. We're getting
I
better
agree.
at understanding because there's so much conversation out there about trauma and the impact of trauma. And I always say it could be capital T, lowercase t, it doesn't matter. These things happen to us often when we're young, and we have to have a vehicle or a road map, if you will, to make sense of it, particularly if we're younger. And particularly if it's a loss of a parent, that's a huge, huge, disruption of the family system. So congratulations to you for getting to the other side of that, and again for making this moment available to so many out there who may not know how to get through those moments and make sense of them.
Yeah, well, thank you. I accept that. It's been a wild ride, and I'm so happy now to be able to share other people's stories in this way through my conversation, ask the questions that maybe I was afraid to ask growing up, because certain things were off the table that we don't talk about, right? And we brush everything else under the rug. So I'm just looking forward to hearing your story. But before you tell your story, I would love for you to tell us, 2025 going into 2026, like, how do you show up in the world? Who is Sharon these days?
That's a hard question. I thought 2025 was going to be a calmer year for me. I'm blessed enough to live in two places now. I live in Florida through the winter months and North Carolina in the summer. And I thought I was going to go up there and really, indulge in the mountains and all that goes on up there because I live in a beautiful community and have a lot of friends up there. But it was so hectic. And we had just come out of the hurricane of last year where we were evacuated and there were all these trees being cut down. I wound up never having a reaction. I've never had allergies or anything. And I wound up spending the summer just struggling in a very big way, having a reaction to the, I guess, mold and mildew of all these dead trees in the mountains as they were being, whatever they do to trees to turn them into mulch. I don't know, but it was happening right near my condominium. So it was a very difficult summer for me, unusually so. But and then busy just work wise with clients and whatnot. And so this year is one that it went way too fast, was busier, and then being ill and having that disrupt things. I'm glad to see the end of it, I guess I want to say. I mean, there were many, many beautiful things that happened, but I'm glad to see the end of it. And then going into next year, I've got a full schedule. Things are good business wise. I've got great clients. I'm very excited, as I always am, about my work, and I love the people I work with. But my husband and I have some travel planned, and I just did some renovation on my house, so I'm hoping to entertain more here, and just looking at more and more of what I call work-life integration. I think I'm getting, finally, after all these years of being in the field, I'm getting much better at playing hard and working hard, but not feeling the pressure of the two, just feeling that it truly is more integrated. When I'm down, I'm down. I just got back from a week's vacation, and I was proud of myself that I was working on the flight, out west. And then once I got there, I just totally, I am present wherever I am. So I expect more of that in this coming year. And I love that, because it's taken me many years to learn to cultivate that within myself and not feel guilty when I'm working, or when I'm relaxing, to just know, be where you are, and it's okay. And then tomorrow's another day.
Yeah, and that I commend you for that. I think society does not teach us how to be fully present, especially now with all the distractions that are available to us. And my generation kind of was like before a lot of the technology that was distracting, but also with it. So like I
Yeah.
bridged the gap, and I too will find myself going down these like distraction rabbit holes of things, and I'm working very hard to also stay present and do the things that you described. So hopefully I'll get to your level at some point.
It's a wonderful feeling. It's a very peaceful feeling.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like, why haven't I done this all along? Probably
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Well, what I always say to my clients, Matt, is I think we've come to a place because of the technology, and we all know, there's so many different points of communication that we're required to access throughout the day. For me, as a boxer, we all have texting and emails and, whatnot. But I feel like we have to come to a place where we understand that it is impossible now to complete your day. There's always one more thing that is unfinished. I could sit at this computer 24 hours, and there would still be one more thing. So I pay close attention to my body and my spirit, and I listen to, okay, it's time to shut down now. And of course, I have goals for the day, for the week, for the month, for the quarter, all of those things. But I think it's helped me so much to just say, okay, your body is saying enough now. And sometimes that's earlier, and sometimes it's later. Sometimes I'll walk away and then come back to it later, after I do something else or take a walk or whatever. But just really paying attention to the bandwidth and what is realistic, rather than the list of things still to be done, because it's endless.
Yeah, that, and I mean, I think that's a smart move anyway, because the less bandwidth you have within yourself, you're not going to do the work as good as you would have when you had the full energy or you had all those elements too. So I think super smart, and we should all take a little time to be intentional with those decisions.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
the word.
intentional is important. I think we could go down a rabbit hole on that, but this is really about your story. So I'd love for you to get into it. And I guess the best way to do it is to kind of paint the picture of your life before this main pivotal moment period in your life. And you can go back as far as you need to kind of give us that before version of you.
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, it's a long story because I'm a lot older than you, but I'll tell you that nothing is wasted. When I look back, I often have my clients do a timeline of experience, as I call it. When I look back, everything, there's a thread throughout it. And just the shorter version is, similar to you, although not as traumatic. My parents divorced, and my sister and I were taken from our mother, and I was like 5. And I didn't see her again for years and years and years. My father took us to live with my grandmother. So that was like the early trauma of not having a mom, not knowing why she wasn't coming. My mom didn't drive, and we were in California, and she lived, a good hour away, which at that time it was impossible to get to us. So I don't really know the reason. All I know is that I missed her a lot. And when she did come intermittently, like, I don't even know if it was once a year or whatever, I remember crying a lot when she left, which may be why she didn't come back because it was probably too traumatic for her. So that was the early years of being placed in a home with aunts and uncles and cousins and my grandmother, who I love dearly. But it was clear that we were not wanted there by my other, other relatives, and always feeling like I didn't belong. And of course, now later in my life, as I've, you know, my PhD is in human and organizational systems, and I've worked with so many hundreds and probably thousands of clients through the years. I've learned that if we don't know where we belong in that early family system, meaning mom and dad, that's our original family system, I really believe we don't know where we belong anywhere. So similar to your story, it took me many years to figure out that this had a tremendous impact on me. Had I not met my amazing husband, I don't know that I ever would have known where I really belonged. When I met him, he was just like the haven, and still is all these years later, that, gave me my sense of worth and value, and always has been my biggest supporter. So I was very fortunate because I didn't plan that. I didn't look for that. I didn't even know what to look for. I think the universe was looking out for me and just gave me this relationship that was beyond anything I personally could have imagined. So that first turning point was, being taken from my mother. And then years later, my husband and I, as I think you may know, we had a son who was born with a very rare metabolic disorder, our son Michael, who at the time of his birth, that was really the second pivotal moment that I was not in any way expecting. And I think that's probably true for most of us. The pivotal moments come unexpectedly, but that's what makes them pivotal, right? Because we're down one journey and then one path, and boom, now you're somewhere else, similar to your story at 8 years old. And so that Michael was, I was literally told at the moment, moments later, that he, probably wouldn't live past 2.
Mm.
The first indicators was a heart condition, but my son lived to be 27.
Oh, wow.
He was physically disabled all his life. He was absolutely the joy of our lives, but then he got ill. He was critical 4 years. So that was, the birth was the big shock.
Yeah.
And then,
because you had no idea going into this,
had
like
no
any
idea.
complications, and they
Yeah,
weren't testing as much, right?
Well, they had just started, because this is so long ago, they had started amniocentesis, but, people weren't sure what it was, what it did. My doctor didn't recommend it. And frankly, because it was metabolic, meaning at a cellular level, it wouldn't have shown up anyway. And I'm so grateful for that, because, who knows, if I had known, maybe I would have, aborted this baby. I can't imagine that I would, but who knows? You get recommendations from a doctor, and the worst case scenario, you don't know what you might have done. So he was everything. So then the second pivotal, I'm sorry.
Before we get to that, I would love to know how that changed. I mean, I can make assumptions of how finding out that maybe something that you prayed for, or you always wanted to be a mom, and this is the situation you've now found yourself in, which is still, like you said, you were able to make joy from it. But like, how did you feel like in that moment of finding out? Because I don't know, I bet there are some women that would be like, what did I do? Or did you have any of those kind of feelings?
That's such a great question, because, actually I wrote a book. My book, Isabel's God, is about those early moments, and then Michael's life up to a certain point. But I remember just being really in shock. One, the shock and horror of you're coming home. You think I had the perfect nursery. Everything was ready, prepared, everybody's excited. And then you're coming home without a baby, because he stayed in ICU for 2 weeks. And just those, going back and forth to the hospital, and you're exhausted and you're scared. And I remember and I wrote about this in the book, I remember there being a sign that made no sense to me in the ICU that said 30 days to bankruptcy. And why they had that sign in the ICU, I have no idea. It might have been a nurse's joke, but to us, it terrified us, because we thought, oh my gosh, like, how long are we going to be in here? And are we going to lose everything in the process that we've worked so hard to build in preparation for our family, So, and I remember asking my husband about it, and he had called our attorney to find out, what do we need to do to protect the baby, to get the services. You have insurance, but you're young, you have no idea, like, what does this mean? So it was more shock and confusion. And then once he came home, most of that, just disappeared, because here I'm home and I've got this little beautiful baby. But you're now starting to explore doctors, and they're telling you a variety of things. We didn't know he had a metabolic disorder. We thought it was a heart issue. But it was serious enough, according to the early, predictions, that they said, he'll have surgery by 2, but he probably won't live, much beyond that.
Yeah.
So that
That's
was a horrifying thing.
right. And
But
I would imagine that a lot of mothers have this like idyllic picture of what motherhood is going to look like. Did
mhm.
did it did that feel like that? Did it feel like a trajectory of that, or it was
Yeah,
just
it's
like this
it's
is the
like
new
the
journey I'm on?
no, it feels like it feels like a death, because what you thought you were going to have is not there any longer. That's gone now. And then you have neurologists and a whole host of doctors, saying, he's not going to see, he's not going to walk, he's not going to talk, he's not going to do all these things. And I had read all the developmental, mother childhood development books, and he wasn't meeting his milestones. He didn't crawl on time, he didn't sit up on time. He was a beautiful baby, but he wasn't meeting the milestones. And then they just kept telling me, well, it's because he was in the hospital. But I knew that, I knew 2 weeks couldn't make those differences. But then he started coming along, and he started crawling, and he started talking. He was just so happy. He was just a beautiful baby. You would never know. But he wasn't growing like he was in the lower, I can't remember now, percentiles, like he was thin, even though he was, I made all his food. I was fanatical about what he ate and all of those things. And then as he got older, it became clear he wasn't going to walk. So he had great cognition, he was fine otherwise, but he had speech impediments. Because if you don't develop, for those that may not know, if you don't develop in the motor skills, walking and crawling and all those things, the part of the brain doesn't develop in the proper way. So he had a little bit of speech articulation issues. Later in life, he had vision issues, but he never walked. So we did everything. We did all the therapies. I was exploring things as far away as Europe and all of that. And then you just come to a point where you realize, I can't fix this. I have a child with a disability. This is life now. And that was a big turning point too, because I wound up getting very active in the disability arena as an advocate on behalf of children and families. And I think he was maybe, I want to say 8, 9 when that came about. He was using a walker at that time. And by then we found out it was a metabolic disorder at the cellular level. And we just started to live that life of, 2 parents with a disabled kid. And I got very active, as I said, across the state and the nation, because services needed to be improved. There were just a lot of things. And I just really felt, I felt like I was called to speak up on behalf of other parents who maybe didn't have the time or resources. Because when he was, younger, I didn't work. Advocacy became my job, if you will. And I eventually became president of a state for the state of Florida, for an organization that represented, children and families. And we actually made a lot of legislative reforms and did a lot of really good things on behalf of those families and children. But it changed the trajectory of my life. I didn't really have a career per se. I had worked before, I got married in, law firms, and I was real involved in, legal professional, aspects of the legal profession. But Michael changed everything, because when I got involved in advocacy, I started eventually speaking, training, and it just opened up a whole new career for me.
It's like it almost created an additional purpose, like a individual purpose for yourself to help others in that particular way. Or did it feel like it
It
was
did.
driving you to like a I think we all have this dream that we're going to find the perfect thing, right? Like this perfect job. Did it feel like it was a puzzle piece that you didn't know you needed, but it kind of fit and gave you a purpose?
I always had a desire to serve others. Like, I used to work, I went to Catholic school, so I used to work in the convent and I would do tutoring they had an orphanage there, and I worked in nursing home. I always did that kind of stuff. But, when you don't have parents, my grandmother was old, so you don't have parents that are guiding your talents, your skills. You're just out there on your own. So I was an A student, but there was no real career path. There was no one saying, oh, you need to go to college or you need to do this or you need to do that. I had a love of learning, but I couldn't afford school. I didn't go back to school till after I got married. And so it was just like everything happened backwards for me. Nothing was planned. Nothing was easy. I'm frankly some days waking up going, I can't believe the career and life that I've had. I know my parents would be very proud. My grandmother certainly would be. But I know now, and when I wrote the book, Isabel's God, my professor at the time, because I did it in a master's program, I had written an essay just, kind of on the fluke to get a deadline met. And it was about my grandmother who was disabled. And then he said, she needs to be in the book because she prepared you for the disability world. And it's just like you look back and you go, yeah, like this was all like destined to be. I was that kid that, was the protector of my grandmother when the kids made fun of her because she only had one eye and her nose. Somehow early in her life, she lost her nose. Literally, she didn't have a nose. It was like this deformed thing on her face. And kids would make fun of her and call her a witch and whatnot. And she was my grandmother. I mean, I didn't even notice those, anomalies on her face. And so I would defend her. And I remember even as a kid, like wanting people to see how much I loved her and that I wasn't afraid to kiss and hug on her. And then years later, doing the same thing with my son when, people would look at us weird, like, oh, this poor mother with a kid in a wheelchair. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. I'm the luckiest mom there is. I've got this great son.
Yeah.
So those were big pivotal moments. And then of course, when he got ill and passed, that was the next one that really, thank God, the others, I think, as I briefly outlined them, prepared me for
Yeah.
that. And
But it doesn't at the same time. It's like we have this prepared sense, I guess, or we know how to move through it, but did you feel actually prepared when it happened?
no, to
Yeah.
your point, you never are. Like I had spent, 27 years intellectually preparing because I knew it would come at some point, but you don't know how it's going to come. You don't know. And he was critical for 4 years. So the loss of him over those 4 years, I mean, by the time the final act occurred, I was relieved on his behalf that it was over. The suffering was over because he suffered so much. But you just,
That's
the,
a
the
that's like 2 decades of anticipatory grief. Would you say that you had it that full time, knowing like it could happen at any point?
I don't know that I would call it grief so much as just
Okay.
stress.
Oh,
Because of who he was and the joy that he was. I mean, his laugh, his smile, his humor. A lot of parents who have children with disabilities are dealing with behavioral disorders and, they're isolated in a whole other way. I mean, my son was handsome. People were attracted to him everywhere we went. He was the kid that, we took on an Alaskan cruise. That was, he always wanted to go somewhere different, every year for his birthday. So one year we did an Alaskan cruise, which was the last thing on my bucket list. But he was the young guy that, the captain would say, come and let me show you how we run the boat, and he'd show him all the computers. And, we would get into places, that you just would never get into. You take him to a play and they take him backstage to show him how, the Phantom of the Opera chandelier is set up and brought out. It was such a privilege. And he didn't know that those things didn't happen to everybody. He just thought, this is what happens. You go to a theater and people take you backstage. I'm like, no, son, this doesn't happen. I wouldn't be back here if it weren't for you. So there was so much joy in him, but then there was a lot of work. It really took my husband and I a lot, between us, just the care for him, and we had supports and help and whatnot, but it's still, you're doing a lot. And so the stress was always weighing on me, and the stress of, if we don't do it right and he gets ill, we could lose him. So it
It's a
is a
lot of
form of
pressure.
grief, but you don't think you're grieving because you frankly, you don't have time. You're so busy.
Yeah. How did it affect your relationship? Did it bring you guys closer? Or I would imagine that there's a lot of families that face these really hard challenges, I would say. I mean, he was a
Yeah.
beautiful kid and all this, but I would imagine that there's some friction that happens for some couples. Did it help your relationship or did it strain you at times?
Well, at times it does, yeah, because you're just fatigued.
Hmm.
But my husband is extraordinary, and he was very, very involved and very hands-on. And so it did, we were just a unit, the three of us. It was like a love affair between the three of us, and it did bring us closer. And even now, there's always these comments that, marriages don't survive after the loss of a child. And I don't know what the statistics are on that, and I think it would depend on how the death occurred and the circumstances. But for us, it brought us closer because, I mean, I can't even imagine ever being with somebody who didn't go through that with me. Like, they wouldn't really know me, I don't think. Like, we went through this together, and it was really tough the first couple of years. I mean, it's still tough. We go away at Christmas because we just can't do Christmas here without him, kind of thing. Everything used to be at our house. Christmas, all the holidays was at our house. And so we just created new traditions. The first year Michael died on September the 17th. That first year, my husband said, I just can't do Christmas here. Let's go to Paris. And I was like, wow, we'd never been there. And, we had the resources, thank God, to do that. And I said, Michael would love that because he loved to travel. He would be so proud of us that we're not just sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves. And we did that. And we kind of intentionally stayed out really late Christmas Eve. We're people of faith. So we went to, we're not Catholics anymore, but we went to like midnight mass. So we would like wear ourselves out, and we slept through most of Christmas Day
Mm,
intentionally. And then we got up in the afternoon and, walked the streets of Paris and went to dinner, and we're like, we got through it.
yeah,
And then we decided, hey, this has got to be a new tradition for us. Like, we don't care where we go. We just got to go somewhere
I love
to
it.
have something to look forward to.
Yeah. And to make new memories with, I mean, I love the part where, probably a lot of your thought is how much your son would have loved, the trips that you're going on and the new traditions that you're making and the things that you guys are doing together, creating these new memories too. I think there's a lot of power in that.
Well, you bring up an interesting point because I always tell people when they ask me, try to come up with new traditions or whatever, it's different for every family. But what I remember, to your point, because we had traveled so many places in the United States with Michael, was I knew I couldn't go anywhere that we had been with him, that it had to be somewhere that we'd never been as a family. And that's when my husband said Paris. I mean, what woman doesn't want to go to Paris, especially at Christmas? I haven't been back since, but it was just a bittersweet trip.
Yeah.
It was exciting to see new things and experience new things. And one of the things that surprised me, Matt, was we really enjoy, like, Europe is so different from the United States. It's not as commercial at Christmas time. It really is more, at least as I've experienced it, more about family. So you'll see, real nativity scenes and people teaching their children, the Christmas carols. And there's not as much glitz and glamour and, Santa on every corner kind of thing. And we found that we loved being in the middle of all that and watching the families. Like, we really have great joy in watching all this family interaction going on. And oddly enough, it doesn't depress us. It just makes us very happy. And I think part of it is because we had so much stress doing the holidays for all those years, trying to, do all the food and everything in the midst of, caring for our son, that as I watch these families, there's a part of me that goes, phew, They look really stressed out. They look really happy. I'm going to enjoy the happiness and I'm going to let go of the fact that I'm just sitting here having a cappuccino and I'm not running around, like crazy trying to prepare for Christmas Eve or whatever.
I th- I
So
think
you
that's
make your best, you
yeah,
do your best.
but I think that's so important and something that like I think a lot of people don't understand unless they go through some kind of grief and figuring out there's such a dichotomy of experiences in that grief moment. Like there's happy and there's sad, and we have to be able to live with both or all, in my opinion. I think, like when my mom died, I thought the only thing I can show is that I'm sad. Like, God forbid I laugh about something happening in my life that is immediate shame, right? And so like all these things were assigned to me for so long, and it's like people will ask me, you lost your mom and then you lost your grandmother, who sounds like you had a very similar relationship with your grandmother that I did. People are like, "Oh, what do I do? So and so, just died," or my friends. I'm like, I can't give you advice. Your grief journey is going to be your own, but I can tell you that whatever you're feeling at whatever point in time is perfectly okay. And you need to be okay with that, because you are a human being and something on TV might still be funny. And it's okay if you laugh, and it's okay if you want to cry or you want to throw something, whatever you need to do, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. We in my field we talk about that as non-dual thinking. It's not so black and white. It just is. And so I always say to people, it's perfectly fine for me to be sad about Michael and miss Michael, but it's equally fine for me to be happy and excited that I still am blessed with a wonderful husband and I can still go on a wonderful trip and I have great clients, have a great life. And I know that my son would want that. Like Michael was one that after 9/11, and all the grief and mourning that went on in this country. And, he was glued to the news like the rest of us and, paying attention to the list of the deceased on the paper, in the paper. But I remember one morning him literally at breakfast turning to me and saying, "Mom, I think it's time we're happy again." And I'll never forget that because he had wanted, had he had the opportunity, he would have been a fireman. That was kind of the thing that, at least maybe it would have been different if he hadn't been wheelchair bound, but as a young man in a wheelchair, that's what he would have liked. So he was stricken very deeply by the towers. We were watching it together because actually I was packing to go on our first trip to Italy. We'd never been to Europe, and we were packing to leave for Italy, and he had chosen not to go, and we had never left him. So it was a very big decision trip. I had manuals. I had 3 different couples that were going to take care of him with full instructions and the whole thing. And then the towers go down and we were both, sitting there together watching it. So it was a very big turning point in his life. And for him to have the courage to say to me, I think it was maybe 3 months after 9/11. I'm not even sure now, but he just knew like, okay, we need to lay it down and we need to be happy again. And so that's partly why I don't feel guilt that, I've gone on with my life. And my husband and I were just talking about it last night is, if he'd lived to this point, like, what would our lives be like? And I said, well, one, we wouldn't be in the mountains because it's not accessible where we live. And I feel like he led us to this place up there because we have a whole new community, a whole new life up there. And people who know about him, we do a memorial golf tournament in his memory and raise money for people with disabilities. I have about 30 friends from the mountains that live in a variety of places around the country that come to the tournament because they feel like they know him. And it's just, his legacy lives on through us. And I just feel grateful for that.
How long ago did he pass?
He passed in 2008.
Okay, so
So it's been a while. It feels some days like yesterday, especially around the holidays. And then other times it just feels like forever and ever, that he's been gone forever and ever because so much has happened in our lives since he died. Everything changed. And as from when you lost your mother, everything changes.
yeah.
And you don't, for the longest time, I felt like I didn't have an identity. It's like, well, I'm not a mom anymore. Like I'm not,
Oh, after. Okay.
yeah, I had my career, I had, all these other things going on, but that big part of you, that most important part of being Michael's mom was gone. And my husband always says, like Mother's Day, he likes to make a big thing out of it. I go, but I'm not a mom. He goes, you'll always be a mom. I go, no, you got to have somebody to mother to be a mom. I don't feel that I'm a mom anymore. Maybe that's meant to be because I also have a deep understanding and empathy that I bring to my clients, and I hear so many. I work with a lot of high achieving leaders who, have everything, but there's still an emptiness there, something missing, what I call the emptiness of success. And I have such compassion for them. And I feel like my work is much, much deeper having been Michael's mom.
Oh, I would say so. And that what you just said about what did you say what do you call it?
Emptiness of success.
I
Yeah.
think so many people were sold a bag of goods that if you do all these things and you check all the boxes that you find that happiness. And I learned that that was not true, and finally things came to be where I was finally able to process the grief and realize, okay, I'm going to just do life the way that I want to instead of the way that I think everyone else wanted me to,
Yeah.
which, was just like go to college, do really well, go to get a master's degree, get a good job, buy a house, like none of that. I was like, okay, next, what will bring me the happiness part? And so, yeah, I can resonate. I resonate with that. I'm really curious because you have, like everyone or a lot of people have multiple pretty significant life shifts in your life. Do you look at any of these points? I don't know if this is a practice of yours, but do you look at any of these points that were quite pivotal to see what about that particular moment changed you and how the different versions of you kind of have been throughout your life? Or do you feel that there's still a really strong thread from beginning to where you are now?
Well, there's a thread, so it's both and,
Mhm.
especially because of my work and my doctorate work and is in human development. And there's 12 stages of human development, as I often am heard to say. And most of us, and especially in America, in the workplace, I think it's now like 68% don't get past stage 5 or 6. So there's a whole lot of growth opportunity there. So I have changed tremendously since Michael died. I was a spiritual woman going into that, but then to survive, I had to go deeper. So I did a lot of, things, both professionally and personally to grow up into what we call later stages. So I'm like stage 10 now out of 12, which has its own issues. You got to do the work and you bring a lot of the shadow, as psychologists talk about, with you. So it's not like, you become this, supreme being or anything. I'm still a very flawed human being. I think the difference is I know those flaws. And when I fall into the dark places again, I can get out a lot quicker. I have a high witnessing capacity. I have the ability to see myself literally in the moment, which is a big part of what I train my clients to do. Because then when we can witness ourselves in the moment, we can make different choices rather than, after the fact, coming to it with guilt and shame and all the remorse. So that's a huge piece of the transformational work that I've done on myself as well as that I do with clients. And then eventually you stop doing those dumb things again because this doesn't make sense. This doesn't serve me or the universe. I need to stop. But I'm always a work in progress. And I think the biggest change for me is, when you're trained in this level of work, you're trained to see people's behaviors. And I think in my earlier career, it was easier for me to judge. And now I see them, I see only their potential. All my work is around human potential. So I see the potential first, and I have very little space for judgment. It's more empathy and compassion. Because I see them and for who they truly are. That's one of the biggest compliments I get from clients is I felt really seen by you. Because most of us go through life and don't feel seen at all for whatever reason. I feel
Like you
that's,
did as a kid.
yeah, and you yourself. I mean, I think many of us, again, the belonging and the being seen, even if we have great parents that are doing their best, sometimes, they're pushing us so hard, right? I see a lot of that with my high achievers. They were pushed so hard they didn't feel seen. And so there's so many things that go on in the dynamics within the human spirit. And I just feel privileged to be someone who is trained enough and who's been through enough of my own trauma that hopefully I can be that mirror, that crucible for another human being to step up into their highest version of self.
Yeah, there's something about being seen or feeling maybe validated in the way that we feel. And sometimes I like to ask those some random questions to help or to share the elements of people's lives that we don't normally say out loud. Like, like, oh, I felt like a garbage human when this happened because of XYZ, when normally we'd be like, oh no, I learned from that moment and whatever. But like the real feelings I think are so important because I had this experience when I was a kid or when I was a teenager. This is probably just me processing grief in whatever way I knew how. I swear I convinced myself that my mother was in witness protection. She was just like in hiding somewhere. This was like 9 years after she died or so, something like that. So I was old enough to know better, but I convinced myself that she was. And then one day when time was good, she was going to come back. And I never told anyone that because it felt very, weird. Like it just felt like as a teenager, you don't say that to other people. But I was talking to someone who also lost a parent pretty early, and we got onto the conversation about how she did the same thing. And when she said it out loud, I was like, there was this like wave of validation that I wasn't a weirdo. Like I wasn't crazy for thinking that when I was a kid, but I felt that so much. So there's something about this validation piece or being seen or knowing that we're not the only one that feels this particular way, even if our circumstances are slightly different. So I love that your life has provided you challenges, but now this opportunity to help people in ways that, maybe they never would have encountered.
Yeah, I think, I have a dream if I could ever fit it into my schedule that at some point I'm going to do something for parents in grief because it's a different type of grief. And the reason it's different is because it disrupts the family system, the order of the system. I mean, technically a parent is not supposed to bury their child, right? And it doesn't matter the circumstances of that child's death or how old they are. But to your point, one of the crazy things that I've never shared with anybody, other than my best friend who also happened to lose her daughter at 5, is, and it's still kind of a thing, and it's a silly thing that I hate. Now there aren't as many because of other opportunities, but I hated going into Hallmark stores. It was something Mike and I would do together for every holiday, and we'd pick out the cards, for Halloween, Thanksgiving, whatever, Christmas, Easter. And in the beginning, every time I walked into a Hallmark store, I swear all the other cards disappeared. The only ones I saw, and it was like they were jumping off the shelf, were "To Your Son." And I just would turn around and walk out. And those are the kind of things that, parents have a million different ways. It's like seemingly ridiculous things haunt them. Similar to what you're saying about making up a story about your mom being in the witness protection program. Grief makes us go to places, and it's partly, I think, how the brain helps us cope and survive. Where you just know, oh, this is a danger zone. I don't need to be in Hallmark anymore. I'm out of here. And in fact, I don't even send out cards anymore. I mean, like for Christmas and all that. I just don't do it. Like I was the person that sent out cards for everything to everybody I knew. I do the
Saving a
online.
lot of money now.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I do the online ones now, to a select group. But there's things that just pop up in unexpected places, and it's never what people think it is. It's never what you think it is. And to your point earlier, whatever it is for you is fine for you. And we have to be okay with that. People want to tell you to do this or to do that. I remember opening the closet in my office, years after Michael died. And there was a box. I was cleaning out my closet. It was a box of all his school records and all his medical records, because I had to keep everything. Back then you kept hard copies. And every time I went to a doctor, I'd bring my portfolio of Michael's medical history, and we didn't have the portals like we do now where we all have access to everything. And I remember sitting on the floor just like stunned and saying, my husband walked in and I said, I have to keep these and I'm not sure, where to put them because I need the space in my office and blah, blah, blah. And my husband said, why do you think you need to keep them? I said, well, in case I need them. And he said, you're never going to need them again. And I just burst into tears because I could not, after 27 years of keeping all these records, to throw out the medical records to me felt like I was saying he never existed. And I couldn't do it. And my husband said, you don't have to make that decision now. We'll just pack them up safely in a nice, plastic carrier thing where they're protected, and we'll put them in the garage for now. And I just think, I've heard other friends whose, their mother-in-law comes in and says, oh, you need to clear out the closet now. You need to move on and get on with your life. People meaning to say the right things. But I think it's important when you've had a loss like that to recognize that you do what you do when you're ready to do it. I still have boxes of Michael's things in the garage. I've redone his room, but his closet is still full of, jerseys from the Magic, the players he loved. And there's just certain things that I'm not ready and may never be ready to get rid of.
And that's, I mean, like we said, like your journey is your journey. Like these are the decisions that you can make. And I love that. I love that you don't feel pressured to do whatever. And it sounds like your husband is an amazing person in which he's very supportive and kind in the way that he approaches things like these. Because I would imagine that there are other spouses that are like, just throw it away,
Yeah.
and just be very, forward with that. But
Well,
it's interesting.
if I could say one more thing, just for any couple out there, to also recognize how important it is to know that you may grieve differently. Like I'm at that time was more spiritual, I would say. And so I was journaling and writing letters to Michael and all, and I didn't feel the need to go to the cemetery. My husband's more action driven, more concrete. He was going to the cemetery 3 times a week for years and years and years. And even to this day, if I go to the cemetery, it is manicured to, it's perfect. My husband makes sure that everything is polished because we have a huge gravestone thing that I designed and it's bronze, so it gets weird looking. He keeps that all manicured. That's his thing. And I remember at one point, years after Michael passed, him saying, how come you're doing better than me? And I said, I'm not doing better than you. I'm just doing it differently because we're different places in life. And, and it's okay that you need to go to the cemetery and it's okay that I don't. I go holidays and things like that and we go together certainly, but I don't feel the need to be there all the time because Michael's with me all the time.
Mm.
And he's in my work. He's in my heart. He's in my spirit. It's just a different thing.
It is. And I love that you said that because I think so many people that haven't quite, maybe they've never experienced something, they just think that there's one way. Like, tell me the steps and that's how I grieve. And it's like, good luck, because that's not going to work, right? Like we have to find our own path. I think I look back on my messy journey through grief or avoiding grief as a blessing because I did everything wrong. Like I did of course it was right, but it felt
Yeah.
like I did everything wrong. But what happened was in that time period, I got really close with my father's mother. She became like best friend, mother figure, all that stuff. And when she was diagnosed with cancer and we knew that the end was coming, that terrible, messy 20 plus years of screwing everything up for myself and others allowed me to have the most beautiful ending with her and have the conversation that people wait too long to have, like have it when we're both able to tell each other everything that we ever meant to each other. It allowed me to sit by her bedside until the very last breath, like I would not have done that
How
had I
old were you when
not
she passed?
screwed up. I was about 34, 30, 34, and I was prepared. I was more prepared than my father. I was more prepared than my uncle. I was more prepared than the people around me. And I think it's because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And then I found out what I needed, you know, that many years later. And it allowed me to create something like the best decision that I've ever made in my life would be that experience with my grandmother from.
Well, that's a beautiful thing, man. I'm so glad you got that because you didn't have that with your mother. And, your wisdom and your maturity allowed you to really lean into it. And I tell people all the time, death is a sacred time. I mean, I have a friend right now who's got a husband who's very ill, and she's frantically doing, as any of us would, everything she can to, help him get better and be comfortable and all that. And she said, "Oh, Sharon, I love that word." I said, "No, this is a sacred time. I mean, we are transitioning from a life we have known to, I believe in an afterlife. Not everybody does, but whatever you believe, it's a sacred time. This person is leaving you." And I know when Michael was in his last days, the staff support that we had around him, they were angry at me because I had accepted that we were at the end. And they wanted me to fight. That old family, I come from a family where you fight and you grieve and you mourn very loudly. And my grandmother was a wailer and, very dramatic. And I remember having a conversation with them that, I'm not giving up on him. He's gone already. I mean, I knew from the authorities around me that he was already gone. And so we just needed to help keep him comfortable through that transition of the body, but his brain, he was gone. So the sacredness of being there for him in those last hours or even the last years was just something that I'm so glad I was able to do. And I have no regrets about how, just similar to what you're describing with your grandmother, you want to know that you were with them in the most beautiful, sacred possible way without the drama. I didn't allow people in who wanted to bring in the drama.
Don't need that. It was my first experience in that way, and I just like I would wish that experience. It sounds terrible to say, but I would wish that type of ending, if it has to go that way, if someone is suffering in that way, I wish that people are strong enough within themselves to do what's right for themselves and for the person that is passing, because no regrets, like you said. It's something that I know my grandmother was either at the hospital around the first breath that I took, or was either driving there very fast as soon as I was born, whatever that was. And I wanted to be there when she took her last breath, because it felt we shared such a. It's I would say maybe the relationship that you had with Michael is similar to how I felt the relationship that I had with my grandmother, because I don't remember my mother very well. So my grandmother really was my mother, if you will. So I think it just allowed such a beautiful ending, in which my grief journey after that was so, dare I say, perfect. Like, I did it perfectly the way I needed to, and it wasn't long and drawn out. Like, I leaned in. And so, it's hard to say that there are silver linings in some of our really tragic, things that we wouldn't wish on other people, but there can be.
Yeah. I think too, another piece, and I know we've gone a while now, but I want to offer, because I have friends around me that were very close to Michael that really, it's obvious they're not comfortable talking about him. They haven't done the work to handle the grief. And I don't know. I feel like I love telling stories about him. My husband and I love talking about him and laughing and sharing with the people up in the mountain who don't know him, parts of his life and things that he said. And I think that's how, when you mentioned, we don't talk about these things from a systems perspective. It's important that we honor who came before, and it's important that we honor their place in the system. So when we pretend a grandfather didn't die, or we pretend a mother didn't die or whatever, and we no longer talk about them, what we say in systems work is that which we ignore or try to quash down gets louder and louder. In the case of an 8-year-old boy, it would become a prevalent part of the voice because we're not allowing space for that person, that mother, that most important person in our lives. And I would add that it's what we're seeing in society today with the marginalized communities, those voices, Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ movement, the Me Too movement. Whenever you quash someone in any system, those voices ultimately will rise up. It's what we're seeing in Israel right now. So we have to acknowledge that as human beings, we have a place in a variety of systems. And when we fail to do that, it only creates tension, chaos, turmoil, war. And ultimately, we're all just wanting to belong and be loved and valued.
It's so true. I thank you for that. I'd love to ask the question that I like to ask everyone, and then we'll have you share a little bit of how we can find you. So if this version of Sharon, the way you described at the very beginning, if you could walk into that hospital room right after you had Michael and you found out some information, is there anything you would want to tell her about this journey you were about to go on?
That's a tough question. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah. I just need to know it's going to be okay. I think it's such a common but in the moment, did you think it was going to be okay, or did you have fear and doubt and worry?
I had a lot of fear and doubt and worry, but I think at the core of who I am, because of my faith and my spiritual background, I always feel like God's in control, and I don't necessarily know what it means, but I know He's looking out for me.
Yeah.
He, she, whatever. I know there's a bigger plan beyond me.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for allowing me to ask the questions that I did and help share your story. I was going to say help share your story. You're very good at telling your own story, but having this conversation in this way, allowing a stranger to ask you these questions, I really appreciate you being open to that.
Well, I appreciate the depth of the questions. No, most people don't go there. So I appreciate what a great interviewer you are.
Well, I appreciate that. As a kid, I wasn't allowed to go there, so I'm going all for it now. If people are listening to your story, maybe they've had a similar experience to one of your life shift moments, or they're going through it now, and something about your story resonated with them. What's the best way that they could reach out to you, find out what you offer to the world? How do they get in your orbit to learn more about you or connect with you or tell you their story?
Well, thank you for asking. It's SharonSpano.com. And of course, I'm all over social media. And then we'll have an appearance page on my website specific to you. And that's SharonSpanoWorkshops.com/life shift. And if they go on there, we also have a wonderful quiz that I developed based on the stages, the 12 stages of human development. We focused on the 6 that we know are more prevalent in the workforce. And it'll tell you where you are, where you land, give you some action steps on what you might do to develop yourself further. And I think the main message I want to leave your audience with, Matt, is that whatever you're up against right now, I know this from everything I've shared with you, as you do as well, that it's an opportunity for huge, huge developmental growth and what we call developmental shifts in my work. And it just means life's going to get better if you do the work.
But you got to do the work, and you got to be ready to do the work, right? Like, I think there's a couple pieces there. Like, it took me forever to be ready, but once I did, I knew it was important and it brought me here. So I love what you're doing for the world. And I love that you found your purpose through, love, really, and having your son and enjoying those 27 years that you had together, and now, celebrating him in a different way. So thank you for just being on this journey with me.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for everyone listening. I super appreciate it. I'm just sitting here in this extra room in my house doing this podcast every week. So thank you for being on this ride with me. And for that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again, Sharon. Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.